Every fight that will be shown in the background of this entire video was done with melee in Apocalypse without dodging or using a single relic. But the basis for this tank is the most brainless concept you can think of. Left click. That's it. If you're a prior viewer of mine and you are already familiar with the concept of the Steadfast tank, I have two statements that are going to throw you for a loop. The first of which is that Hero's Sword is now better than World's Edge, and the second of which is despite all the nerfs that Steadfast builds received, they are now stronger than they were in the past. As usual though, we will start off with what we are using before we talk about why we're using it. A lot of you are probably expecting to see Rally Band in the ring choices here, but you're not. So please, for the love of God, wait, and I will explain. Starting off with our armor, we are using the full Lido Mark 1. If you have a complaint about the fashion, eat shit. For our relic, we have Profane Heart, with melee attack speed, health, and shield effectiveness for our fragments. Then for our accessories, we have Matriarch's Insignia, Drakestone Pearl, Rerouting Cable, Brawler's Pride, and Hardcore Metal Band. Your primary weapon is irrelevant, but for your secondary, I personally chose to bring Nebula. And then for our melee weapon, we are using Hero's Sword with Steadfast attached. Our archetypes are Alchemist and Handler, with Frenzy Dust and Guard Dog as our abilities. In our concoction slots, we are bringing Bark Extract, Verdant Tea, Meat Shake, and then Mudtooth's Tonic, with an optional consumable as rocket fuel. For traits, we have Potency and Kinship by default, then we have 2 points default in Expertise and Spirit, then we max out Vigor and spec into Fortify, Blood Bond, Siphoner, Barkskin, Bloodstream, Leech, Recovery, and then we put our last remaining 6 points into Regrowth. Now moving on to why we are using what we're using. Starting with damage reduction, because it wouldn't be a tank without it. Our armor with the 50% fortify bonus puts our total armor to 316.2, which in turn puts our armor DR to 61.26%. On the other side of the total DR equation though, with flat DR, we have 10% flat DR from Steadfast, then we have 6.5% flat DR from Meat Shake. Pair that with the 5 stacks of Bulwark from Hardcore Metal Band, which is another 25% flat DR, and Barkskin's 10% from our trait, and this puts our total flat DR at 51.5%. 51.5% flat DR plus 61.26 armor DR puts our total DR to 81.21%. We are actually over the DR cap of 80%, but considering that Hardcore Metal Band may not always be up depending on the boss that we fight, it doesn't kill us to have a little heavier armor. In regards to bolstering our EHP, we are using Mudtooth's Tonic, as well as the Vigor trait, and the health fragment on our relic, putting our total health to 172.5. With the shared damage from Blood Bond, our maximum health, and our 80% damage reduction, this puts our total EHP at 958.33. Add in the shields that Rerouting Cable can get with the shield effectiveness fragment that we have on our relic, and this brings our total EHP to 1,533, meaning that we would be able to take 1,533 damage before we would die. I hate repeating myself like this in every single fucking video, but if you are confused on how this is calculated or what any of it means in the context of tanking, effective health, and all the above, please go watch this other video. It's several minutes long. You will leave considerably better equipped to understand how this build even functions, let alone how to make your own builds in the future. With the core basis for our survivability out of the way, now let's talk about the melee functionality. This used to not be true, as Hero's Sword used to be bugged for the longest time, but Hero's Sword, like World's Edge, does not have a specified stamina cost. That means as long as you do a charge attack with at least 1 stamina, the projectile will always fire out. Or at least, if it does have a minimum cost for the projectile, it is so low I've never noticed it. Because of how that functions, though, that means we can bring something like Drakestone Pearl. Drakestone Pearl allows you to regen stamina during melee attacks at 20% of the normal rate. As such, between every charge attack, throwing out every projectile, we will continue to regen stamina. Because we've regened at least 1 stamina between every attack, that means every successive attack will always shoot the projectile, meaning we will never have stamina issues. The problems we would have are getting interrupted, and that is why we bring the Steadfast mutator. Steadfast makes it so charged melee attacks cannot be interrupted and gain 10% flat DR, meaning that as long as you are chaining your charge attacks together, you can never be staggered. In addition, Steadfast makes it so all damage taken during a charged melee attack is converted to gray health. That may not seem like a huge deal, but it is. And it's because of that that we're able to spec into something like Bloodstream, which is a significantly larger healing increase than Regrowth. And we can constantly rely on Bloodstream because we will always have gray health whenever we take damage because of Steadfast. In essence, at this point, we are able to chain our charge attack projectiles for as long as we would like without getting interrupted and while gaining extra damage reduction. But if it were just just that, this wouldn't be very strong. And this is where rerouting, cable, and matriarchs come into play. Rerouting makes it so after every 20 stamina spent, you gain a shield for 5% of your maximum health. The shield can stack up to 50%, and as long as you are chaining your attacks, it's never going to run out. You will always gain shield with every attack you do, and a large part of that is because of Matriarch's Insignia as well. Matriarch's Insignia increases melee damage by 35%, which does affect the projectile, by the way, and causes all successful melee attacks to restore 10 stamina. This also applies to the projectile, so the swing of your sword will give you 10 stamina just for hitting a target, but in most cases the target is going to be farther away, so the projectile itself still counts as a melee strike. So we not only have our standard stamina regen during attacks because of Drakestone and then Verdant Tea, which increases our stamina regen as a whole, but we also get more stamina for every successful hit that we land, via either the blade swing or the projectile that it shoots, resulting in the gain of a fuck ton of shields. But sometimes bosses can be fickle, to say the least, and that is why we are leaning so heavily into attack speed. We have the 15% attack speed bonus from our relic fragment, and then we have the 15% attack speed bonus from Brawler's Pride. More attack speed means more healing from lifesteal, since if we do get blasted past our shields, we still want to lifesteal, which is why we have Profane Heart along with Siphoner and Leech traits. But not only does more attack speed mean more lifestealed health, it means more stamina gain from matriarchs. And because we have more stamina gain, and because we're also spending more stamina by doing more attacks, that means we do in turn get more shield. Brawler's Pride can be a flex slot in some scenarios, and that's probably the ring most of you would think you should replace with Rally Band. Rally Band is a ring that converts 10% of gray health to regular health on a successful melee strike. That is an absurdly powerful ring, but this is not the build it fits in. Some of you are going to really struggle to trust me on this, but I promise you that leaning into Matriarch's functionality for increased shield gain is more effective for us than using Rally Band. It is better for us to prevent the health getting converted to gray health to begin with by adding more shield as fast as we can than it is to plan on getting that gray health and converting it afterwards. Rally Band is good, just not for this build, and that's something we'll talk about later in an entirely different video. On the note of more attack speed though, that's obviously why we have Frenzy Dust as our alchemist ability and Rocket Fuel as an optional consumable. In a lot of the fights I did, whenever I walked in, the first thing I would do is I would pop Nebula's mod just so I could apply corrosive to the enemy and so they'd take more damage, and then I would use Rocket Fuel and Frenzy Dust to temporarily boost my attack speed. As for why we bring Guard Dog, we don't actually intend to use it. If you've already watched my Crystal Staff video, then you already know that Guard Dog is a non-standard source of 15% damage reduction to your entire team. I say non-standard because that means it will bypass the 80% damage reduction cap as another multiplicative factor. But the main reason we bring Guard Dog is simply because it reduces the damage that the dog takes at all times by 20%. And since we have Blood Bond to share our damage with the dog, that is extremely important. Because we bring Guard Dog, we don't have to spec into Rugged in our traits. And with this setup, I never once saw the dog die. And then as for how this build works in combat, your gameplay loop is pretty much hold left click, and then hold left click, and then hold left click. We call this a Braindead build for a reason. Some of you are probably going to complain that Hero's Sword needs to be aimed more than World's Edge ever did. But one, World's Edge has been nerfed, and while still good for maybe just general mob clear in the general world tiles, for bossing, it's really not that good anymore, guys. It's too slow, its damage just isn't as good anymore, and Hero's Sword, now that it functions identically to how World's Edge does, attacks way faster, and overall just has significantly better damage as a whole. The Annihilation fight using the last version of this build from the last DLC took 6 minutes. This version takes 5.5. It's not a huge increase, but it is 30 seconds faster within the same fight. Is it perfectly catered to tank any boss in the game with any modifiers? No, and it never will be. This is purely meant to be a Braindead build to get you through most bosses. If you want a crazy fucking build that will deal with any boss in any difficulty with any modifiers, please go watch my Crystal Staff tank video. It is significantly more involved, and because of that, it is also significantly more risky. If you screw up, you're probably dead. But as long as you don't, and if you can get it down with a little bit of practice, that build will take you through anything. But for the people who complained that that was too hard, and they just wanted their monkey neuron activation build, here you go. If you're going to swap out Brawler's Pride anyways, against my advice, then yeah, Rally Band could work. You could do Blood Jewel. You could do a lot of different stuff. But very rarely will they ever beat out the attack speed of Brawler's Pride. But do note though, that the weapon can change depending on the boss. Some bosses are significantly better suited to different weapons. Hero's Sword is just the best generalized approach to any boss, but that doesn't mean it is the best approach to every boss. Stonebreaker, as before, can still be a really good choice if the boss is always grounded and they're always up on your ass. Technically, Red Doe Staff can too with its special charge attack. World's Edge should only ever be used on a boss that has numerous barriers, and that is only because the World's Edge penetration effect will come in handy there. But otherwise, World's Edge should pretty much only ever be used now for killing trash mobs while you're exploring. And then lastly, if you are watching this video, that means that I have also published on my website the build queries. These will be in beta for a bit. To start with, we are only going to allow tank-related searches, but for those who have been waiting, they are out, and you may now go and generate whatever build you want to your heart's content.